Hello and welcome to the January webinar series at Vision Australia. We're just waiting for a couple more people to come along and join us for today as our numbers steadily increase. We'll do a bit of an introduction shortly. Hope you're all having a fantastic day. And what a relief it is to not have 40-degree heat for people that were in New South Wales yesterday. Extreme. So, as we kick off, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. This webinar is designed with the chat function on Zoom enabled so it can be interactive. For those using a screen reader, use keystroke Alt-H to bring up the chat window, then type your question in. I will do a halfway point once again, just reminding people on that functionality on screen readers. But without further ado, our guest at this time is a USA Today bestselling author, publishing coach, and self-described heavy metal maiden. She's published more than 50 novels under the writing name Steffanie Holmes, and 4 self-help guides to writing and self-publishing, including the book How to Unleash the Beast, Releasing Your Inner Writing Monster. Now, this book's fashioned to help you kickstart your own writing career and unleash your story on the world. Joining us from across the Tasman in New Zealand is Steff Green. Thank you so much for joining us, Steff.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me.
So traditionally, this wouldn't be my first question for a speaker, but as it provides a fair bit of relatability to our audience, can we talk a little bit about your sight loss and how it influenced your early childhood?
Yes, certainly. Okay, so the condition that I have is called achromatopsia, and it would be super cool if there was anyone out there with the same condition. That would be awesome. It is very rare, and it basically my eyes have, we're all supposed to have millions of rod cells, millions of cone cells, and rod cells are your night vision, and cone cells are your daytime vision and color vision. And I have got no cone cells, so I effectively use my night vision all the time, which means that I see no colors whatsoever. I have quite extreme sort of light sensitivity. I'm wearing some sort of rose-colored glasses, which act to kind of cut the glare from the sun, and that comes with I'm severely short-sighted to the point where I'm legally so this condition I've had it my whole life. It's stable, so it doesn't really going to get much worse. And I grew up in a small town in New Zealand, and I was the only kid with a disability at my little tiny school. Unsurprisingly, people were not very nice. Kids were not very nice. I didn't have very many friends, and so I kind of really enjoyed books were like my escape. So I was a big avid reader, and I was also quite creative. So I used to draw a lot and used to write a lot and write stories, and that was kind of my escape from things. And yeah, that's pretty much where we're at.
So schooling in New Zealand, we're going to say, how did the school sort of treat your sight loss at the time? Was it an inclusive experience, or bearing in mind, obviously, the kids are not probably reflective of the school itself, but
Exactly. So yes, so I was mainstream schooled, and I had a teacher aide who used to come in, and just bear in mind some of my memories may not be like entirely accurate, because I was a kid.
yeah.
But I had a teacher aide that came in a couple of times a week, I think, and just helped with things that I might need. And when I was maybe about 7, I think, I was taken out of class for periods of time and was taught how to touch type,
Yeah.
on an actual typewriter, um, which was quite it's actually quite something. And then I was given a before computers and laptops were even a thing, I was given a word processor called a Star Writer, and I would do my work on that so that I wasn't. I had a little miniscope to look at the board, but I would miss a lot with lifting the miniscope up and putting it down and writing. And they figured I could type a lot faster than I could write. So from a very young age, I was typing all of my work, and that, unbeknownst to everyone at the time, that gave me a little bit of a head up, a head start in terms of becoming a writer. So that was quite cool.
I can imagine I imagine as well too. Were you called on to lump a big typewriter into your classes, or was it already there? Like I've got some images of you just pulling this massive thing out of your backpack.
This thing, this I didn't have a typewriter. The first thing I had was this word processor, and it was enormous. It was like the size of a small suitcase,
Yeah.
and it had a tiny screen on it, maybe
Right.
the size of a mobile phone today. That was the size of the screen, and it had a little printer in it as well. And it was heavy. And I had to lug that. um, we only had one classroom, so I didn't have to lug it from class to class, but I did have to take it home and then take it to school and take it home. And oh my God, that thing was heavy. And, and now, now laptops are just incredibly light, and yeah, we're very, very lucky.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's probably one of the things that would have changed, I imagine, in over the time period. So you obviously have a set genre with your writing in particular. Did you have any sort of genre that you more leaned towards when you were younger? Like it sounds like you used, you were craving a bit of the escape. So were you going to your fantasy worlds, or were you more interested in your sort of crime novels? What was your poison at the time?
Oh, I've always read quite widely, which is actually an interesting thing. People who are writers often tend to read quite widely,
Yeah,
which is quite interesting. And so I've always been very, very attracted to science fiction and fantasy. I love crime and mystery books, but I'm quite specific in my tastes. I really like sort of Midsummer Murders style, very
yeah,
small towns, very, 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 British chocolate box cover. Things are not as they seem. That's the sort of style of crime and mystery I like.
yeah.
Um,
Something with
I
a voiceover that says in a sleepy town, like
exactly that is my jam. I love a kind of, I just when I was young, I remember the first books I one of the, some of the first books I got really obsessed with were these books called by an author named Doreen Tovey, and they were non-fiction sort of memoir books about her Siamese cats. And she had this she lived in England, and she had this little cottage that was falling apart, and they had Siamese cats, and they had this recalcitrant donkey, and they had this, they were hilarious, these books. And I didn't always get the jokes because they were written for adults,
yeah,
but they were just hilarious. And there was about 12 or something in the series, and I would read them all and then go back to the beginning and start again. Um, and I love horror as well. And when I was young, I loved the Goosebumps books. And my sister and I had, I think, every single Goosebumps book. Which,
yeah.
if there's a lot of Goosebumps books. Um, and so yeah, I quite like horror tropes and things like that as well.
That they were an interesting book series because yes, they're all by the same author, but you never really knew what you were going to get because some would be a lot more full on horror than others.
Like, except some were very silly, but
So obviously there's a time frame, as you pointed out. There are a couple of little hints that you had along the way with your reading tastes and obviously a lot of writers have been known as well to look for an escape in their when they're reading as well. When did you decide, right, well, this is what I want to do. I want to be a writer. This is it.
right. So when I went to I from the age of about 8 or 9, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I was always going to be an archaeologist and writer and an artist. But the main thing I wanted to be was an archaeologist. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to explore pyramids. I wanted to find cool stuff. I wanted to just, learn about history all day, every day. And I went to university and studied archaeology and lots of dead languages and really useful things like that, and had an amazing time. And then when it came time to try and get a job, I could not get work in this field. And what I wanted to do was be a museum curator and work in a museum and have kind of a collection of artifacts that I sort of owned and could research, and that was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I had done a lot of volunteer work in the past, but when I would go to talk to people who I had happily let me work for them for free, they would say things like, "Well, we think you're a health and safety risk. We don't trust you around the artifacts." Just complete
Right.
nonsense. Just nonsense. And I was very young, and I was very shy, and I wasn't able to stick up for myself in a way that I might have now. But basically, I experienced a lot of discrimination
Yeah.
because of my vision, and a lot of these issues that people thought were issues would have been perfectly fine if we'd just been able to have a conversation about them, and I could talked about adaptations and accessibility and things like that, and it all would have been fine. But that's not what happened.
Yeah.
What did happen was that I came home one day after a particularly bad experience, and I was in tears. And my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, said, "Well, you can kind of look at this a couple of different ways. You could keep going, keep trying to talk people into letting you do a job that you can do and I know you can do. Or you could think, well, if you say that I've done archaeology, like you've done all these really cool things already, what would
Mm.
be another job that you would love to do that no one could tell you that you couldn't do?" And my immediate thought was, I would be a writer. That is what I would do. And I
Yeah.
sort of went I sort of attacked this new job, this new dream of mine, with a lot of fire and passion. And I dusted off some old manuscripts I worked on in college, and sent them off to publishers, and basically spent about 10 years trying to teach myself not just how to become a writer, but how to make a living as a writer. And so I was submitting novels to publishers, I was writing new novels, and I was doing sort of freelance work. I was working as a Braille transcriber, and then after about 6 years, I went to tech companies and started doing blogging and kind of copywriting for tech companies. So I was
Yeah.
working as a writer and then doing my fiction work on the side. And that, yeah, and basically what happened was that after about 10 years of doing this, I had got a publishing deal for three very serious science fiction novels um, in, in Australia with a big five, big publisher. And then that deal was rescinded
Wow.
because the publishing house decided they were going to shrink the line, and so they rescinded some deals, and so I kind of got paid out half the deal, but my books didn't get published. And I was sort of looking at having to basically start this whole thing over again.
Yeah.
And lots of authors were starting to talk online about self-publishing. And I had also just recently been given a Kindle. And I was starting to read everything on my Kindle because I could read it in large print, hold it up to my face, and it didn't weigh 100 tons like all
Yeah.
the other books. So I was loving the Kindle, and I was hearing about these authors doing really well, self-publishing their books on the Kindle with Amazon. And I thought, well, I've got these 3 science fiction books that no one wants, so I'll give that a go. So I hired a graphic designer friend to make some covers, and I found an editor, and I got them edited, and I put them up on Amazon, and they sold really terribly. But I was absolutely addicted to it. It was just
Wow.
so much fun to hold your own book in your hands. So yeah, I was a bit addicted to it. Um, And then I switched to, and that was so 2013, 2014. And then in 2015, I went to a party, and a friend there was talking about the 50 Shades of Grey books.
Yes.
And yes, and she had loved them, and I had read the first chapter and did not love them, and I was kind of rubbishing them a bit. And she sort of said, "Well, it's not like you could write a book." Not meaning that she didn't think I could write a book, but that just that she didn't think I was like a romance writer. She thought I was a bit sweet and innocent. And I thought, well, I read a lot of romance, mainly mainly fantasy, kind of paranormal romance.
Yeah.
But I read a lot of romance, so I thought, well, I'll give this a go. I'll give this a go. And I wrote this little short 30,000 word novella in secret, and I thought, well, I'll publish it under a secret pen name, and then 6 months time I'll tell my friend and we'll have a laugh about it. And then so I did that, and then this little 30,000 word book that I wrote in 3 weeks sold 1,000 copies in a week. And I sort of had to tell my husband, like, kind of sheepishly, I've actually made some money self-publishing this month, but not from my super serious science fiction that I've been writing for a decade, but from this 30,000 word shapeshifter romance novel. And we had finished laughing about it. He said, well, are you going to write some more? And I thought, well, yes, actually I am. And so that was 2015, and I basically been publishing a romance novel approximately every 2 months ever since. And in 2018, I quit my day job. And yeah, it's been pretty amazing.
Definitely sounds it, and it sounds like there's a lot of fear associated with self-publishing still out there. It sounds like the perfect advert to an Amazon self-publishing deal, doesn't it? If I was at the head of Amazon, I'd be wanting to latch onto that story and saying, this, this can happen.
Yeah, it's been incredible. I mean, one of the things that's so amazing about it is that because I keep so much of my royalties. So if my books were published by publisher, I would get maybe a dollar for a paperback book for every paperback book, and I would get about 10%, 40%, between 10 and 40% of the net royalties of an ebook, which is not very much in the end. But with Amazon, I keep 70% of the royalties of, so 70% of everything that I make in royalties from Amazon I keep. And this means that I don't have to sell nearly as many books as a big author at a publishing house in order to make the same amount of income. And because I'm only one person, and I can, I kind of run my own publishing house, and I can decide how many books I want to put out and what I want to do, and when it's time to do something else. And so yeah, you can find a little niche audience, and if that audience is big enough, and you keep giving them books that they want to read, then it's a completely viable career choice, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, so we're gonna go back a little bit, because obviously I think a lot of people, when they're, especially, our audience here today would be a little bit fearful of taking those initial sort of first steps. How was your experience with finding things like editors, or you didn't originally use an agent? Obviously, a publisher, you would say, had mixed results, but how did you go about sort of finding editors and sticking with editors and stuff like that?
So what's quite wonderful is that there is a big community now out there of people who are self-publishing. And so you can find spaces online. A lot of self-published authors hang out on Facebook in sort of discussion forums. There's kind of a growing number of people on TikTok and places like that, giving out lots of information. And
Yeah.
if you can get involved in those communities, they are very ready sources of information about it and about things like editors and cover designers and things like that. And basically, that's where I found all of my, anyone that I've worked with, I probably found through the indie publishing community, which means that, the editor that I work with or the editors that I've worked with, they're priced for indies and they know what we need, which is often, I need a book to be turned around in a week, and I need it to not cost me a gazillion dollars,
Yeah.
and so editors in the indie space, that's what they provide. And cover designers is interesting because obviously I am not a very good judge, as a visually impaired, legally blind person. I'm not a very good judge of what makes a good cover.
Right.
And so I need a designer, to work with a designer who kind of can take the lead a little bit and doesn't just make me a fantastic
Someone you
cover.
can trust as well, I imagine. Yeah.
Someone you can trust, and they can't just make you a fantastic cover. They have to make you a cover that fits with all the other covers in your genre, because
Right.
that's how readers choose books. They go, unlike writers who tend to be very broad in what they enjoy, readers are generally very narrow. They tend to like one genre and often one subgenre. And so they will literally go and look for books with covers that look like that genre or with blurbs that sound like that thing that they like. And so your cover has got to almost not stand out. It's got to look like those other books. And so you've got to really trust your cover designer.
Yeah, I can imagine. And look, without going or delving too much or appearing cynical in any way, shape, or form, did you find that with your editors, once again, did you have nothing but positive experiences with editors, or did you have some that you just had a gut feeling that they're not the person, they're not my person?
Honestly, with editors, I have had really good experiences. I've only really had two editors in my life. So I use my processes that I finish the book, I give the book to my husband, who's my first reader.
Yeah.
Reads the book, and picks out often continuity errors and things like that I've missed.
Yeah.
The book goes to my editor, then it comes back to me, and then sometimes I will use a proofreader, but often I'm a little bit time crunched, so skip the proofreader. I have, for the editing slot, I used to have an editor that I used for about 4 or 5 years, and then she stopped editing because her own books were doing well, and then I got a new editor, and that's pretty much the only editors I've used.
Okay.
I've had a lot more problems with cover designs.
Yeah. So once again, popping back a little bit to your journey at this particular point in time, when you went, right, well, I'm going to be a writer, that's exactly what I want to do. Was there any equipment or technology that you decided, right, I need this so I can begin writing? Was there anything that stood out for you as a must-have, as an initial outlay or anything like that?
Not that I can really remember, because I was already quite a high user of my laptop. So I already had a laptop, which is what I did, and I already had the tech on that I use. I used to use Zoom Text.
Yeah.
But now I find the accessibility that's built into, I use a high contrast settings and large print display, and I find that the settings that are built into what Apple or PC or whatever are fine for me.
Yeah.
But I think at the time, I can't remember, but I think at the time I used Zoom Text, and pretty much that was all I needed from
Yeah.
yeah.
As far as the user interface goes with Amazon, with self-publishing, no glaring issues that you can think of there?
No, not that I can remember, and it keeps getting better and better.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it keeps getting better and better. So, but no, it's a pretty easy form that you fill in, so you can just tab right through it. But yeah, it's not a problem.
And you've already sort of somewhat touched on the fact that you involved yourself in writing groups and things like that. Were there any courses or podcasts that you thought, right, well, this is a good place to start? I think one of the things I'm often getting asked by potential writers is, oh, I'm not sure where to start. Where's somewhere that I can start to sort of grow my ability to do this?
So I don't think I've ever really taken a course. I love podcasts about writing.
Yeah,
I tend to listen to, because when I started, I sort of felt like I had been practicing writing for 10 years. So I sort of felt like I knew what I was doing. But what I didn't know was the publishing side of things, like the publishing and the marketing and the how to get my books out into the world. So
yeah,
podcasts I listen to tend to focus on that. And some that I really recommend. There is the Spa Girls, the Self-Publishing Authors SPA. So the Spa Girls, which are 4 authors here in New Zealand, and
right,
they do a fantastic podcast. It's got like 400 episodes. They interview
nice,
all kinds of indie authors, and they do kind of episodes where it's just the 4 of them talking about things that work, things that don't work. And it's fantastic. There's a fellow in the UK called Mark Dawson, and he has a podcast called The Self-Publishing Show.
yeah.
Similar kind of format. It alternates between interviewing people about their publishing journeys and kind of talking about how to do different things. And that one's really good. And then there's another one, which is UK based that I really like, by a lady named Sasha Black, and it's called the Rebel Author Podcast. And it's quite funny and lighthearted, and it's kind of about how to do things a little bit differently. And that one's really cool as well.
And look, we've probably provided a rather great segue here to talk about your self-help books as well. Um, uh, on the Rage Against the Manuscript. So what I might take the opportunity to do though, because we're at the halfway point, is just to remind people with questions that we do have the Zoom function open, the Zoom chat function, should I say, enabled for those using a screen reader. The keystroke is Alt-H to bring up the chat window, and then type your question in, and I will relay it to our guest for her to answer. Obviously, we've got half of the webinar left remaining, so get your questions in. I will go a little bit on to the books that you have written in regards to helping other people sort of get their stories out there. When you started writing these books, did you start writing these books with the interpretation of, this is what I would have needed if I'd had the opportunity to read something like this? This would have maybe made me take that leap a bit sooner, or?
Yeah, yes, pretty much. It was trying to kind of coalesce. Basically, I've been kind of talking in these author spaces, and I had done a little bit of like teaching and done workshops at Romance Writers of New Zealand conferences and things like that. And I was just starting to really enjoy kind of putting together my thoughts about self-publishing and what works and what doesn't work, and just seeing things click for other people. Like, oh, I'd never thought to do it that way, or I'd never thought about it this way until you said that. And just seeing other people kind of take that advice and roll with it and get their books out, and it's just super cool. So I thought, well, if I kind of write a book which has sort of the main book that I have is How to Rock Self-Publishing, and it's been a while since I've read the book. I think it's got 11 sort of chapters, or kind of 11 tenets of, these are the 11 things that you sort of need to put into place in order to give your books the best chance of finding an audience. And it kind of deals with the basic how-to of how to get your books onto Amazon, and like what, when it asks you for certain things, how to write a good book description, what categories to choose, things like that. So it's got the kind of that sort of practical stuff in it, but it's also got some stuff about, thinking about what your brand is as an author, and what genre you're writing, and kind of how to yeah, sort of how to give your books the best chance. Um, and that was sort of the idea behind it all.
Yeah, and I'm guessing I'm thinking I might already know the answer to this, but within regards to your own writing styles and helping others read or helping others find their writing styles, I imagine as well. I'm going to say you're a bit of a planner. Would I be correct in saying that?
No, no.
Oh, there we go. Completely off the mark. So you're a pantser.
Yeah, so I'm a complete I'm a complete pantser. I use a method which I call the skeleton draft, which is where for a book, um, a normal length book that I write might be 90,000 words. And what I will do is over the course of 2 or 3 days is I will start with my idea and my character or a couple of characters, and I will write a super rough 10 to 20,000 word draft. It is a complete piece of rubbish. No one would ever want to read it. It's just filled with half finished sentences and kind of action and dialogue, but it takes me from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and I get the rough sort of shape of what's going to happen, and I get to know the characters in that. And then I go over that draft 3 to 4 times, and each time I add more to the story, and then by the final draft, it's perfect. And that's my methodology. Is the skeleton draft. I have a little mini course on my website about how to do that, and I've talked about it on podcasts before. And I plan on putting a book out that explains how I do it and how it works, but I haven't got around to it yet.
So do you operate using word counts and things like that as well, or is that something that once again you just kind of go with the how you sort of go with the flow?
Yeah, go with the flow that like a book doesn't have to be a certain length. A book is as long as it ends up being. But I do find that I write more and I stay on track if I use a timer. So I sit down and I start the day with whatever amount of words I have had on the manuscript, and I say, okay, today I'd like 2,000 words or 3,000 words. And so I set a timer for half an hour and I write um, and don't do anything else. And then when the timer goes off, I can have 2 minutes where I can, a couple of minutes where I can go and stretch and check Facebook and kind of do other things. Down on a spreadsheet how many words I got in that half an hour. And
Yeah.
it's kind of gamifying writing a little bit. So I like to try and, how fast can I get my 3,000 words? Can I get 1,000 words in the 30 minutes? Thinking about it like that. So I find that quite.
So how much of a part did your former life in archaeology play in language, understanding cultures? Like, do you travel a lot to get these dreamscapes to take your readers into, or is that something that you gained a lot of that knowledge with your archaeological background, or?
Yeah, I think that everything that you do in your life kind of goes into your writing, whether it's overtly or sort of less, without you sort of noticing. So it's all in there. Um, I do love to travel. We just got back from Italy and Malta. And Malta was in particular was just such an interesting place that I'm writing um, the final. I'm writing the book that I'm writing at the moment now has a whole section which is in Malta,
Yeah.
which wasn't planned, just because it's so interesting and it kind of fit. I didn't realize how it was going to fit together, but yeah, things that I'm really interested in, I'm very good at sort of following a thread, and those threads inevitably, used to be part of my life as an archaeologist and are still part of my life as, a person who's interested in history. And then also those threads go through my books. So there is find a lot of, um, yeah, a lot of that sort of stuff is in my books, although my books are not historical.
Okay, well, bearing in mind I already know the answer to this, but our listeners may not, so I'm going to ask it anyway. The topic of this webinar series and the speakers that we are getting to come along to this, it's a topic of how disability representation has changed in mainstream media, and obviously yourself. I'm going to focus a little bit on character writing for characters with disability. Now, for the purposes of people who haven't read all of your books, have you found it challenging to write characters that don't have low vision, or have you found it harder to write characters that do?
I'm so happy to talk about this because this is such an interesting thing. But it's not something that a lot of writers are interested in. So it's super cool. So I've about 53 novels. Of those novels, about 20 of them, I think it is now, have blind or low vision main characters, whether it's romance, male female romance, so whether that's the heroine or the hero having who is blind or low vision. And the rest of them, I have a few neurodivergent characters and a couple of other disabled main characters, but the rest of them are pretty able-bodied, let's say. I probably find them equally easy and equally difficult, but in different ways. I think because as a reader, quite well, as a reader, the majority of books I read, because the majority of books in the world are about able-bodied characters. So that's kind of the context from which I'm drawing on. So it's relatively easy to write able-bodied characters because I'm very used to reading them and seeing them, on TV and things like that. So, which is the whole point of why we need more disabled characters in literature. So, what has been so I have a number of characters who are blind and low vision. The most interesting thing I found about writing those characters is not writing them, but is writing them in a way that that readers who aren't very familiar with what it is like to be blind or low vision understand.
Yeah.
And even I do try and put a lot of effort into this, but even so, sometimes you do get some odd questions. And that's definitely one thing to be aware of if you are writing books for like a mainstream market where the majority of readers are not going to be familiar with everyday life as a disabled person. It's sort of things like I'm trying to think of a good example. I have a blind main character, heroine, and the hero will walk into the room, and the book will say he walks into the room, and people think, but how does she know he's walked into the room? Because she can't see him walk into the room.
Yeah.
And because I don't quite realize sometimes that he walks into the room is not obvious that the character can hear him walking into the room, because that's completely obvious to me, but it's not obvious to them.
Yeah.
And so you will sometimes get comments about things like that. Oh, she did this thing and you couldn't do that if you were blind, when it's completely true that you could, but it's making people understand how those things happen, even for very simple things. So that is really, really interesting. I've forgotten what the question was.
No, well, you've answered it, so I'm going to say that you knew what it was all along. But I guess where I'm trying to get to the crux of is the changing perceptions would be, to use an example, there has been some stereotypes regarding blind and low vision characters, for example, that they must have superhuman hearing because they're blind or low vision, and that was a rather popular stereotype a little while back. I think due to yourself and other trailblazers in this sort of field, it has kind of changed a bit of that perception around, that's just a stereotype. That's not actually the case. And as I said, the other two guests as well, and we haven't spoken to Joe Strecker yet. We're speaking to him next week, but um, a lot of what they do is educating, um, you know, people in mainstream media that these are stereotypes, because it's always been a misconception that they were the case because media says it is. So I was wondering how many of these sort of questions over the years that you've got, and you've kind of answered that as well, regarding a lot of people have come to you going, well, if he's blind, he can't do that, but he could be low vision. He might not be completely blind, and these are
It's,
some.
and I try really, really hard to. What's been so amazing is that when I grew up, I cannot remember reading a book with a blind character. I must have done, but I cannot remember doing it. There were not very many to choose from. I do remember one of my favorite books had a boy who had a physical disability, but it wasn't blindness. But the vast majority of books I read were about able-bodied people doing able-bodied things. And when blindness appeared, it was in a stereotypical way. It was all about making the able-bodied, being a character for the able-bodied main character to like show off how nice they were,
Yeah,
or they were evil, or they were a prophet, or these really stereotypical things, like you say, the superhuman hearing, or other things. Blah. Now, what we're getting is people literally seek my books out because of the representation,
yeah,
which is just amazing, and people have choices, and people are becoming more aware of these stereotypes. But I also try to be really aware that the majority of people that read my books are not blind. They're not vision impaired. They may not ever have come into contact with a person who is blind or vision impaired.
yeah.
Um, and so they still carry with them all these things that they've learned from media. But they're so excited to read my books and learn. And so instead of, I may sit at home and go, but instead of lecturing them, I try and really kind of nicely talk them through things, and sort of explain to them and use examples from my own life, because it's at the end of the day, we want more people to understand and to embrace, and we want more representation in media. And so yeah, the more widely my books are read, the better it is. So that's what I think.
Fantastically answered. I guess my next question is going to kind of segue into uh, a little bit about how you published, or how you see other markets internationally, uh, with your books appealing to them, and what the differences are between the different markets. But I've got a question here from Robin, who's asking, how much time do you spend on marketing?
Um, I don't all of it. So I'm a mid-career author. So what I do now is very different to what I did in the beginning. And what I did in the beginning was that I was really focused on just getting books out as soon as possible, because I sort of realized that if I wrote commercial sort of ish books in romance, which is the biggest commercial genre in the world, if I wrote books that kind of worked for these readers, and I knew I could sell this many books in a week, and then that would taper off as a book got older. If I got this, if I got 10 books, 20 books out into the marketplace, that was probably enough books that I could not have to do my day job. So I was really focused on um, just simply writing books as fast as I could. And I had a newsletter, and I would send out, people could sign up to my newsletter and they could get a bonus scene from the book. And then I would send out a newsletter saying, hey, a new book's coming out. And I was publishing a book roughly every 2 months with a day job. So I didn't have time for much else. But when I was able to quit, I could dedicate a lot more time. I would say I still try and write 2 to 3,000 words a day. Doesn't always happen. Um, and I probably spend, say, 2 hours of the day, roughly on average, is marketing or admin related stuff. I also have an assistant, and she does 40 hours a week for me.
Right.
She's writing and she does marketing related stuff, and she runs my online store. And obviously that's not a thing that everyone can have, but I've only had her for a year, and she's been amazing.
Yeah. So, my next question was in regards to, obviously you're a USA Today best-selling author. How did you, what would you describe would be the main differences in the different markets from a local market in New Zealand or Australia and the US market? Have you noticed any of those sort of differences in, this is what appeals to this market but doesn't appeal to that, or is it something that haven't noticed?
Yes and no. When I started out on this journey, I was very determined, not like I sort of said, not only that I was going to be a writer, but that I wanted this to be my career. Like I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to have to do copywriting for other people. So I realized really early on that I couldn't focus on being a New Zealand author for the New Zealand market and make that happen. It's possible, but it's a very different path, and it wasn't the path that I wanted. So from the very beginning, I was very focused on an international, highly commercial genre, um, on an international stage, which means um, effectively means America. Um, and there's a few things. Americans really, really tend to prefer American protagonists,
Yeah.
and they do tend to prefer an American setting, although you can kind of trick them a little bit. I often will do an American um, heroine who then goes to another country,
Yeah.
and so that gets you out of America, which is not a place I know that, into other places. Also, fantasy is great because you don't have to be, you don't have to be in the real world. So they with many notable exceptions, they do tend to prefer sort of an American setting. And you've also got to be a bit careful if you are doing things, even if you're taking them outside of that setting,
Yeah.
that you are really careful about keeping the kind of colloquialisms and things like that to a real minimum. Um,
Yes.
we sort of think that sort of stuff adds color, but we need significantly less of it in a book than you sort of realize. And yeah, so I have my editor is a US editor, and part of what she does is take out all the New Zealand isms, all the ones that I don't actually realize are there. Just turns of phrases that are really it's one we taking the piss. We had that the other day. So
Yeah.
it's taking the piss, and she's like, I don't understand what this means. And just if she doesn't get it, then the audiences are going to get it. So that's a big thing. There's a few real sort of genre specific things which you kind of learn the more you get involved in your genre. For example, thrillers, the types of thrillers that are really popular in Britain, not which tends to be the New Zealand market as well, are very different from the ones that are popular in the US.
Yeah.
Romance is really it's quite perennially popular everywhere. But I'm starting to get my books translated into other languages, and it's been quite interesting to see books that were not so popular in the US are suddenly you translate them into German and suddenly they're really popular, or Italian they're really popular, and so you can never quite predict. It's quite exciting.
Um, so yeah, we had another author we spoke to, an Australian author who said something similar. She had to travel over to America. I think it was like 4 times a year, so she was familiar with the terrain, even though never lived in the States, as a way of being able to address the American market. So yeah, it's fascinating to sort of have you reaffirm that. I imagine as well, when you go on, I take it you've gone on American sort of podcasts and that sort of thing where they've wanted to talk about your books. How have you found that experience? Have people been a little bit shocked that you're actually a Kiwi, or?
Honestly, they love it. There, there is such a fascination in the US with Australia and New Zealand in particular. You know, they all go, "Oh, Lord of the Rings," you know, and
Yep, yep.
I always get, "Oh, New Zealand, it's at the top of my bucket list." You know, that is one that happened. Every person I talk to in the US, that's what they say. "Oh gosh, we just really want to go to New Zealand." So you've always got. It's actually really cool. There's a lot of annoying things that can be annoying sometimes about being an indie author in this international market and coming from New Zealand and Australia. You're quite far away from you're
Yeah.
physically quite far away from a lot of things, but it is we have a lot of kudos, I think, just because people are really fascinated with where we live. So
Yeah.
you take any advantage that you can get. So you're like yes. Anything that sets you apart and makes you memorable, and simply coming from Australia and New Zealand makes us memorable in an international market. So that's really
So we got a question from Robin. We did kind of cover this earlier on in the webinar, but we'll go back over it again, obviously. How did you find your editor?
yeah. So I was involved in an online forum, discussion forum about indie publishing. And I don't think the one I was involved in exists anymore, but most of these things have moved to Facebook groups. And so, so basically, I was on that forum, and it was filled with, other indie authors. And I would have asked in a thread somewhere, I'm going to publish my book. Does anyone have an editor they recommend? And there might have been, can't remember if someone recommended the editor to me or it was someone on the forum who approached me and said, "I'm an editor, I'll do it." And I found them through that forum. And I remember that I both the editors that I've had are people that I had been conversing with on that forum for a long time before I worked with them. So not just about like editing my books, but just in general about publishing and writing. So I felt like I knew them. I felt like I knew that they were genuine and they were here. They were genuine people who were excited to be part of the community and help make other authors' books shine. So
Yeah.
so that's where I found.
Charmers. And with sort of the indie sort of groups and that sort of thing, did you just do like a bit of a Facebook search, or
Yeah, there's
and just kind of, for lack of a better term, sort of hang around on forums to find out who knew what they were talking about, sort of thing?
Yeah, and often they'll have it's on Facebook groups. They'll often have like once a month they'll have a thread where people in the group who also run services for authors can post their services, and then you'll get you basically get a whole thread where you've got like 20 or 30 editors, and you can see different options, and that's quite useful. Like I said, I primarily know Facebook groups. So I'm sorry if people out there don't use Facebook, but some that people find really useful. There's one called 20 Books to 50K. It is a very large group, but it has got a wealth of information in it. So that's a really good one. There's Indie Royalty, which is an Australian one.
Yeah.
I believe it's predominantly romance authors, but I don't think you have to be a romance author.
Yeah.
There's Writing Gals, which is for the lady. That's a good one. I'm trying to think. Oh, there's so many. There's so
That's
many.
all right. I mean, that's plenty for people to start searching for. So obviously we're getting close to wrapping up today's webinar. So any last questions, people get them in now. I want to sort of ask a little bit about audiobooks and how they have come along, and mainstream media is now lapping up audiobooks like it was, like it's a brilliant new idea that most of this community have known for a while that it's a brilliant idea. But with any of the books that you've had put into audio format, have you had any part in narrating those, or if you had to choose narrators or anything like that, or has Amazon got something set up?
Well, audiobooks are so fun they're so fun to make. They're so fun to kind of witness them coming together. They're just it's just awesome. So the process so I've done a couple of different processes. Some of my audiobooks I have sold to audiobook publishers, which means that they take care of the production process and they pay me a royalty for the books. And so most of my more popular series have been done through publishers. So this means that so they do give me they do ask, is there a narrator, particular narrator you'd like? They ask you for information about what's the accent, what does the character look like? They often try and get if you have a character of color, they'll try and get someone that matches that culture, which is quite cool. But in the end, ultimately, it's sort of up to them to, you don't have it as much say. So that's one way to do it. And then the other way is to do it all yourself, which I have also done. And this is where you go out and approach a production company, or you approach your narrators yourself, and you say, "I'd like you to make this audiobook for me," and you pay them a fee per finished hour of the book. So if the book is 9 hours long, you pay for 9 hours, 9 per finished hours, and the rate, they're not cheap. I'm currently paying for one at the moment, which is $600 US per finished hour. So it's going to be expensive. But at the end of that, they'll make the audiobook. I don't have, just let them do it. They'll give me files. I can then listen to the files, make sure they're, proofread them basically. And then I put them up on Audible, Amazon, Audible, Apple, all the places that I want to myself. And that means that I keep all of the royalties instead of the publisher, where I only keep a small percentage. I only get a small percentage, but I have to pay for the whole thing up front. So it's really exciting. Audio is it's awesome that it's becoming easier and easier to do it, but it does have a high upfront cost for us authors. So I'm trying to get all my books into all 53 or 54 of them into audio, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Of course not, of course. So obviously winding up, what can we expect from yourself in the next 12 months, and where can we find you?
So much. So I am finishing up a series at the moment called the Grimdale Graveyard series. I've got 3 books out, final books coming in March. And that is a series that has a blind man is one of the heroes, and he's super fun. He's such a cutie. I then have the final book in my Nevermore Bookshop series, which is my most popular series, about a heroine who's going blind progressively through the books, and she works in a magical bookshop that brings famous villains from classic literature to life, and 3 of the villains are her boyfriends, which is Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights, Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, and Poe's Raven, and it's a lot of fun to write. And I'm going to do the final book, and then I start a new series, which is a vampire series, which has a lot of Slavic vampire lore, and there's a lot of actually really interesting mythology about vampires and blindness, and I want to play with that a lot. So I'm really excited about starting this. And then I'm also I'm also doing a lot of audio coming out this year, and then I am also writing a book called Rage Against the Manuscript, which is part sort of memoir, and part kind of tips for writing and publishing and being creative. A little bit like Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic book. Be a little bit like that, but more about writing. And I'm quite excited about doing that. And you can find me on your favorite book or audio platform under Steffanie Holmes. All my books are there. You can find me on stephanieholmes.com, or if you want my writing books or my little writing podcast or anything like that, rageagainstthemanuscript.com is where you will find me.
Perfect. So once again, we've come to 3 o'clock. So at this point in time, I'd like to thank our guest, Steff Green, so much for her time and for a bit of extra time as well, and for her knowledge and experience. And it really has been a fascinating 1 hour session. And I feel like we could extend that for 2 or 3 hours and only just kind of get to the crux of some of the things that you've done in your life. So we really do appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. It's been so much fun, and I've just this, like I said, this is just so interesting to talk about, and it's not something I get to talk about on kind of mainstream podcasts and stuff. So thank you so much, and I can't wait for everyone out there to write your own stories, please.
Perfect. Okay, guys, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you once again for all of our listeners for joining.